His name surfaces like a ripple through ancient time, piercing the veil between what is known and what has long remained hidden. Azazel, a figure cloaked in both awe and terror, emerges not as a myth confined to dusty scrolls, but as a presence whose legacy pulses through the deepest layers of spiritual history. From sacred texts to apocryphal writings, his name refuses to fade. Instead, it invites us into a story of rebellion, of lost purity, and of the tragic beauty of divine justice. Azazel is not a metaphor. He is a being whose actions mark one of the most significant ruptures between heaven and earth. The Book of Enoch, preserved outside of the canonical Hebrew Bible, yet revered among early Jewish and Christian thinkers, names Azazel with an unsettling boldness. While others among the fallen are recorded for their descent into human affairs, Azazel is called out for something even darker. He is the one who corrupted all the earth. He did not simply fall. He dragged with him a knowledge so potent that it rewrote the course of humanity. He took divine mysteries and shattered them into the hands of those unprepared to wield them. His rebellion was not reckless. It was calculated, methodical, and devastating. Even the Torah, in Leviticus chapter 16, hints at his mystery during the Day of Atonement. In the most sacred ritual of the Hebrew calendar, one goat is sacrificed to the Lord, and another is sent away into the wilderness for Azazel. The moment is striking, almost cryptic. Why does this name appear in the holiest of ceremonies? What does it mean that one animal, bearing the sins of the people, is cast into the barren places under this ancient name? Early interpreters wrestled with the text, sensing that this was more than ritual, it was spiritual warfare. Azazel matters because he represents more than just a figure of the past. He embodies a pattern that still whispers today: the desire to possess power without submission, knowledge without reverence, beauty without holiness. His influence did not end in chains. It lives on in culture, ideology, and unseen systems. To understand him is not to glorify him, it is to expose him. It is to reclaim the narrative he sought to distort. And it is to remember that truth, when anchored in the divine, has the strength to outlast any lie. For those drawn to explore the hidden dimensions of faith, this journey through Azazel's legacy is both a warning and a revelation. It challenges the listener to examine the subtle ways corruption still moves through the world. But it also offers hope, because in uncovering the darkness, we prepare our hearts for the light. This series will take us from the ancient rebellion to the ultimate redemption, from celestial war to spiritual renewal. Azazel is not the hero of this story. He is the backdrop against which the brilliance of divine truth is made clear. If content like this awakens your curiosity and stirs your spirit, remember to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a message. Like the video if this kind of teaching speaks to you, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. We value every word. This conversation is not one of mere information, but of revelation. Let's uncover the hidden truths together. It began not with a roar, but with a decision. A moment that split eternity, not by force, but by consent. The Watchers, once radiant beings appointed to watch over the affairs of the world from a place of divine authority, gazed upon the earth and saw its beauty. Yet their vision grew corrupted. They were not tempted by power alone, nor merely by rebellion for rebellion's sake. They were seduced by something far more intimate: desire. These angels, tasked with guarding creation, became enamored with it. The daughters of men, clothed in flesh and vulnerability, awakened within them a longing that burned hotter than their loyalty to the Most High. This was not a fleeting glance or a passive admiration. It was obsession, an inward hunger that devoured their discernment and replaced it with pursuit. And so they came down. This descent was not an act of mercy, not an incarnation born of love, but a betrayal. These were not humble servants bearing gifts of truth, but beings who tore through the veil between realms with impure intent. Among them stood Azazel, not merely as one among many, but as the one who inspired the others, the one who fanned the flame of defiance into full revolt. He did not simply fall, he led. According to the Book of Enoch, 200 angels, led by a figure named Azazel, made a pact upon Mount Hermon to take for themselves human wives. But Azazel's name is elevated above them all, not for his authority, but for the depth of his corruption. While Azazel feared the consequences, Azazel seemed unshaken. Where others hesitated, he thrived. His role was not passive. It was strategic, intentional, and devastating. What began as fascination quickly escalated into a union that violated the natural order. The Watchers, beings of heavenly light, took mortal women and begot children known as the Nephilim, giants of renown, born not of divine appointment, but of unnatural transgression. These offspring, fierce and insatiable, consumed the resources of the earth, brought violence upon all creation, and ignited a chaos that no one could contain. This was not just a physical catastrophe. It was spiritual war. The presence of these giants was not merely a problem of size or strength. It was a symptom of a broken boundary. Heaven had touched earth in a way it was never meant to, and the result was disorder. Creation groaned under the weight of this defilement. The skies no longer sang in harmony. The earth no longer rested. Even the stars, it seemed, dimmed in sorrow. The fall of the Watchers tore through the fabric of reality, not with weapons, but with choices that defied heaven's rhythm. Azazel, with his unrelenting influence, did more than defile himself. He inspired others to believe that rebellion was liberation. He preached a gospel of autonomy, a doctrine that whispered, "You need not serve, you can become." And in doing so, he dismantled the very foundation of spiritual order. The tragedy was not just what the Watchers did, but what they became. Once reflectors of divine glory, they were now forgers of their own will. And this rebellion did not remain isolated. It seeped into the hearts of mankind, infecting every generation with the seed of the same pride. Humanity, witnessing the power and allure of these fallen ones, began to mimic them. What was once sacred became common. What was once pure became polluted. The consequences of the Watchers' fall cannot be overstated. Their act was not merely disobedience, it was an insurrection against the Creator's design. The bond between heaven and earth was meant to be one of alignment, not domination. By reversing that order, they unleashed a spiritual disease that spread through every dimension of human life: mind, body, and soul. And still, at the center of this cosmic upheaval, we find Azazel, not silent, not absent, but orchestrating. While others desired human beauty, Azazel desired something far more dangerous: control. He used this moment not simply to indulge his own cravings, but to rewrite the architecture of divine human interaction. He wanted to teach, to shape, to sculpt a new kind of humanity, one divorced from its maker. This moment, this fall, was not a stumble in the dark. It was a calculated descent. It was the day the Watchers fell, and with them, the first great fracture between heaven and earth. Knowledge is not inherently evil, yet in the wrong hands, it becomes a fire without containment, a blaze that consumes rather than illuminates. Azazel understood this. He did not corrupt humanity with raw destruction alone, but with ideas cloaked in brilliance, innovations veiled as progress, teachings that dazzled the senses while starving the soul. His corruption was not immediate chaos, but the slow unraveling of what was once sacred. He came as a revealer, not as a tyrant. To the eyes of early humanity, his gifts must have seemed divine, tools to shape the earth, to defend families, to understand the heavens. Yet behind each revelation was a poison, subtle and potent. The Book of Enoch tells of how Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. This was not merely metallurgy, it was the weaponization of wisdom. Where once life had been lived in dependence on divine protection, Azazel introduced the illusion of self-defense through force. With these tools came the capacity not only to protect, but to dominate, to intimidate, and to kill. And it did not end with weapons. Azazel turned to the women, teaching them the use of eye paint, adornments, and costly stones. These were more than cosmetics. They were instruments of seduction, designed to manipulate attention and distort identity. Where beauty had once been a reflection of the Creator's artistry, it became a mask crafted to captivate, to control, to deceive. In this, vanity took root. Women were no longer seen as vessels of sacred worth, and men began to pursue them not in love, but in lust. The harmony between the sexes fractured, and relationships once founded on divine purpose became warped by selfish desire. He also unveiled the mysteries of sorcery and enchantments, giving humanity access to forces they were never meant to harness without divine guidance. These practices created an illusion of control over the unseen realm, enticing people to manipulate spirits, to invoke hidden powers, to reach into places where only the pure were meant to tread. In seeking knowledge beyond their appointed sphere, men and women became entangled in deception, mistaking counterfeit power for true authority. Spiritual sensitivity gave way to spiritual confusion, and communion with the divine was replaced by a hunger for secret rites and forbidden spells. Azazel's teachings also included the interpretation of signs and stars, introducing astrology as a guide for life. What was once a canvas of divine wonder became a system of control. The heavens, meant to declare the glory of God as spoken in Psalm 19 verse 1, were reduced to symbols of fate and manipulation. Rather than trusting in divine providence, people began to chart their destinies according to celestial patterns, believing the stars dictated their future. This shift pulled hearts away from prayer and into prediction, away from trust and into calculation. These teachings, so seemingly enlightening, were in truth a profound form of darkness. They fed the intellect while starving the spirit. Societies flourished with innovation, yet crumbled from within. Kingdoms expanded, but morality collapsed. Families grew stronger in number, but weaker in unity. Cultures began to prize appearance over substance, achievement over righteousness, knowledge over wisdom. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, humanity began to drift. Not because it had forgotten God entirely, but because it had replaced him. Azazel's corruption did not shout, it whispered. It offered tools that promised empowerment, but delivered enslavement. He did not need to wage war against mankind. He simply needed to make mankind believe it no longer needed God. And in this deception lay the true horror. Every war forged by ambition, every act of seduction devoid of love, every spell cast in search of control, and every horoscope trusted more than prayer, all of it echoes back to the ancient voice that first said, "Take this, it will make you strong." The influence of these teachings did not end with ancient generations. They evolved, adapted, and dressed themselves in the garments of modernity. Today, the weapons are more advanced, but the violence remains. The cosmetics are more refined, but the vanity still blinds. The mysticism is more packaged, but the hunger for hidden power persists. The stars are read not in sand but on screens, yet the trust in their guidance grows ever more popular. Azazel's fingerprints are not fossilized in history. They are active in culture, in entertainment, in ambition. To see the world through the lens of his teachings is to understand how deeply corruption can hide within brilliance. Not all knowledge uplifts. Not all beauty is sacred. Not all power is divine. Azazel gave gifts that severed creation from its creator. And those gifts, dressed in allure and achievement, continue to shape the hearts of generations who do not even know his name. Judgment did not come swiftly, but it came with certainty. As the cries of the earth rose, soaked in blood and corruption, and as the harmony of creation crumbled beneath the weight of defiance, a reckoning was declared. The Most High, whose patience had been mistaken for absence, issued a decree that would reverberate through time and spirit alike. The fallen ones who had once gazed upon the brilliance of divine light now stood before that same light in terror, their rebellion no longer shrouded by secrecy or seduction. Among them, Azazel stood out, not for remorse, but for the depth of his transgression. His influence had not only altered humanity, but had infected the very rhythm of creation. He had introduced weapons into peaceful hands, vanity into untainted hearts, and sorcery into the sacred. His judgment, therefore, would serve not only as retribution, but as a declaration, an eternal testimony to what happens when glory is traded for pride. In the book of Enoch, Azazel's sentence is described with haunting clarity. The angel Raphael is commanded to bind him hand and foot, and to cast him into the darkness, into the dry and desolate places, into a pit of jagged stones in the heart of the desert called Dudael. There, beneath the burning sands and behind the veil of isolation, Azazel is sealed in utter separation from the world he corrupted. No audience, no voice, no dominion, only silence, heat, and waiting. The wilderness becomes not just a location, but a symbol of what he chose: distance from the presence of God. This desert is not a place where nothing lives, but where life is stripped bare. It is a mirror of the soul abandoned to its own desires, a landscape where all illusions dissolve under the weight of truth. Azazel, who had led others into the wilderness of sin, now dwells in the wilderness of judgment. He is not destroyed, but restrained, preserved for a future reckoning, a reminder that divine justice is patient, but never forgetful. What makes this judgment striking is not only its severity, but its precision. God's response to rebellion is not wrath unleashed without aim. It is measured, exact, and righteous. Azazel is not cast down in vengeance, but in justice. He is not erased from existence, but removed from influence. His exile is not an end, but a prelude, a holding place until the day when all accounts are settled. This speaks deeply to the nature of divine mercy and judgment coexisting. Mercy, in that humanity is given a chance to turn back. Judgment, in that the corrupter is not allowed to continue unchecked. This moment reveals a profound truth. Rebellion carries consequences not just for the individual, but for the entire system it touches. The fall of one angel rippled through the lives of generations. The teachings of one corrupted mind led to centuries of spiritual blindness. And yet, God did not destroy the earth in response. He chose to bind the corrupter and to extend grace to the corrupted. Azazel was cast out, but mankind was given time to return. The image of Azazel bound in the desert also evokes a deeper spiritual reality. Every soul that embraces deception walks into its own wilderness, a place of confusion, silence, and dryness. Just as Azazel is confined, so too are those who follow his path confined by the chains of their own choices. Spiritual exile does not always look like outer ruin. Sometimes it feels like inner emptiness, a thirst that cannot be quenched, a wandering that never finds rest. And yet, even in this, God speaks. The judgment of Azazel is not simply a punishment, it is a message. It tells of a creator who watches, who waits, and who will not be mocked. It reminds every generation that truth will always outlast the lie, and that no rebellion, no matter how seductive, can escape divine notice. The wilderness, for all its desolation, becomes a testament to the unshakable justice of the Holy One. While Azazel remains in chains, his legacy still lingers. But his binding is a promise that evil will not reign forever. It is a glimpse into the nature of a God who deals with rebellion not through immediate annihilation, but through deliberate containment. He allows time for hearts to awaken, for eyes to open, for truth to be embraced again. Azazel's judgment then is not just about what he did. It is about what he refused to be. He refused alignment with divine order. He refused humility, and in doing so, he became the embodiment of exile. His fate stands as a warning, but also as a reassurance that justice is never absent, even when it seems delayed. And in that wilderness where no voice can echo and no light can penetrate, he waits, not in power, but in chains. Among the rituals of ancient Israel, few moments carry the weight and mystery of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. It was a day not only of solemnity, but of delicate spiritual choreography. a sequence of actions that sought to bridge the divide between a holy God and a flawed people. At the heart of this sacred observance was a practice that stood out in its complexity and symbolic power: the presentation of two goats, one offered to the Lord and the other sent away into the wilderness, bearing the sins of the nation, for Azazel. The text in Leviticus chapter 16 gives no extensive explanation, no detailed commentary. It simply says that one goat shall be sacrificed as an offering to the Lord, while the other shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement, and then sent away into the wilderness for Azazel. This mysterious inclusion has puzzled scholars for millennia. Who or what is Azazel that a goat-bearing sin is sent to him? Why would part of the most sacred day in the Jewish calendar involve a figure so closely associated with rebellion and exile? To grasp the depth of this moment, one must first understand the framework of atonement. In the tabernacle and later in the temple, the high priest acted as a bridge between the people and their Creator, entering the most holy place but once a year, carrying blood not only for his own purification, but for the cleansing of the entire nation. The ritual of the two goats, chosen by Lot, was an embodiment of divine judgment and mercy held in tension. One goat died, blood spilled upon the altar. The other was driven out, banished, not as a sacrifice in death, but as a carrier of guilt. When we read that the sins of the people were symbolically placed upon the head of the scapegoat before it was led into the wilderness, we are witnessing more than a ceremony. We are witnessing a picture of sin removed, shame exiled, and transgression carried away into desolation. Yet the fact that this goat is said to go to Azazel changes the tone. This is not merely a geographical removal, but a spiritual one. The wilderness was more than barren land. It was the realm of absence, of forsakenness, the place where Azazel had been bound. To send the sin-laden goat, there was to send it to the source of corruption itself, to return the guilt to the origin of defilement. This was not about appeasing Azazel. It was about confronting the reality of sin's origin. The people did not worship Azazel. They expelled their sin toward him, acknowledging that such rebellion belonged far from the presence of God. The wilderness was not a place of healing. It was a void, a mirror of what life becomes when separated from the divine. The scapegoat did not find rest. It found isolation. Early Jewish interpretations of this ritual saw in it a profound truth, that God, in His mercy, not only forgives sin, but removes it. And yet the act of sending it to Azazel served as a reminder that sin must go somewhere. It cannot be ignored or absorbed without consequence. It must be dealt with, separated, assigned to the realm where it belongs. Christian theologians would later look at this moment and see shadows pointing to the cross. They saw Christ not only as the sacrifice to God, but also as the one who bore the iniquities of humanity and was driven outside the city into the place of rejection. The connection becomes more striking when we consider how the writer of Hebrews describes Christ's suffering outside the gate, carrying the burden of sin far from the holy place. In this imagery, the scapegoat ritual finds its ultimate fulfillment, not in a temporary covering of guilt, but in the permanent cleansing offered by the Messiah. Christ did not merely die for sin. He carried it into the wilderness of death itself and overcame it. The shadow that hovered over Yom Kippur becomes light in the resurrection. Still, the image of Azazel lingers in the ritual. It tells a story not only of redemption, but of separation. It acknowledges that evil has a name, that corruption has a path, and that there is a spiritual exile into which sin is rightly cast. The goat sent to Azazel is not honored, it is exiled. It is cast out so that the people may dwell in purity once more. And in that casting, we find both relief and warning. The Day of Atonement was not only about divine forgiveness. It was about sacred space being reclaimed, about the weight of iniquity being transferred, and about the community being restored to its covenantal identity. The ritual of the goat for Azazel, in all its strangeness, captured the tension between mercy and justice, between the nearness of God and the reality of spiritual exile. It was a yearly reminder that sin cannot be managed. It must be removed. Azazel, once a mighty figure of celestial glory, now stood as a symbol of rejection. Not just his own rejection of heaven, but the rejection he embodied, a destination for all that defiles. And each year, when the goat was sent into the wilderness, it was as if the people of Israel collectively declared, "Let this not dwell among us. Let this go where it belongs. Let it be returned to the wasteland it came from." In this way, the presence of Azazel in the Day of Atonement ritual was not a contradiction of God's holiness. It was a testimony to it. Even the mention of the fallen served to exalt the one who purifies, the one who covers, the one who restores. Through a ritual so steeped in mystery and drama, God revealed that even the most hidden darkness could be addressed, even the most shameful guilt could be released, and even the weight of collective sin could be lifted and cast away. Across time and geography, names change, languages evolve, and symbols shift in appearance, yet certain figures remain persistent, unshaken by the erosion of centuries. Azazel is one of those figures not because of enduring worship or widespread devotion, but because his shadow continues to pass through the world's myths, philosophies, and spiritual imaginations like a flame that refuses to extinguish. His physical form may be bound, but his influence has never truly disappeared. Instead, it adapted, it mutated, and it found expression in the stories that civilizations tell themselves about power, knowledge, and rebellion. In Islamic tradition, Azazel is sometimes identified with Iblis, the jinn who refused to bow to Adam. Though not universally equated, the parallels are difficult to ignore. Both were beings of elevated status, entrusted with roles near the divine, and both chose pride over submission. Iblis's refusal to honor the human form was not a matter of ignorance, but a matter of arrogance, believing himself superior in essence. In a similar manner, Azazel's descent was not due to temptation alone. It was fueled by a belief that the divine order should be reshaped according to his own desires. Whether in Hebrew apocalyptic texts or Quranic interpretation, the core is the same: rebellion against heaven, not by ignorance, but by will. Later occult traditions seized upon this archetype and recast Azazel not as a warning, but as a symbol of forbidden wisdom. He became, in the eyes of esoteric mystics and secret societies, a torchbearer, one who challenged divine authority to grant humanity tools for enlightenment. This reinterpretation removed the moral framework of his story and replaced it with admiration. In these texts, Azazel becomes a dark mentor, one who reveals the hidden arts, one who defies the restrictions placed upon knowledge by the divine. He is no longer merely a fallen one, but a misunderstood liberator. Such reframing reveals less about Azazel himself and more about humanity's persistent desire to sanctify rebellion when it aligns with personal empowerment. This reimagining is not limited to obscure spiritual sects. Azazel's archetype has made its way into literature, cinema, and popular culture in myriad forms. From enigmatic characters who impart dangerous truths to the seductive villain who rebels for the sake of freedom, the fingerprints of Azazel are easy to trace. He appears as the deceiver who cloaks manipulation in charm, the mentor who promises transformation but conceals the cost, the presence that makes destruction seem like liberation. These depictions do not always carry his name, but they carry his essence, an enduring fascination with the one who dared to oppose heaven and share what was forbidden. What makes Azazel's legacy so enduring is not merely the dramatic nature of his fall, but the psychological and spiritual resonance of his story. He represents the temptation to reject limits, the urge to seize knowledge without accountability, the thirst to reshape truth according to one's will. In every age, these desires find new expressions. Whether through technological domination, moral relativism, or spiritual experimentation, the same ancient voice echoes: you can become your own authority, you can take what was hidden, you can rise above the design. Even in religious history, Debates surrounding Azazel's nature have shaped theological thought. Jewish mystics wrestled with his role in the divine economy, interpreting his function not as a rival to God, but as a necessary contrast, an instrument of justice or testing. Early Christian thinkers, grappling with the presence of evil in a world ruled by a good God, found in Azazel a lens to explore the mystery of divine permission and the boundaries of human choice. His existence raised difficult questions that forced believers to examine the tension between divine sovereignty and angelic freedom. Azazel's imprint also touches art and music, where themes of exile, rebellion, and broken beauty are explored. He's the patron of fallen brilliance, the reminder that greatness, when divorced from humility, leads not to glory, but to ruin. In this sense, Azazel becomes not just a figure in history, but a lens through which we interpret the present. He is the face behind every cultural shift that prizes appearance over substance, every ideology that elevates autonomy over truth, every movement that celebrates deconstruction while offering nothing to rebuild. And yet, the persistence of his image is not evidence of his victory. Rather, it reveals the depth of humanity's struggle with itself. Azazel's legacy continues because the battle between light and darkness is not confined to ancient texts. It lives in the heart. He endures not as a force outside of us, but as a reflection of what happens when the soul forgets its origin. His presence in myth and culture is not just a tale repeated, but a wound revisited. It is a signpost, pointing both to the cost of rebellion and to the longing for redemption. In tracing Azazel through the corridors of myth, belief, and art, we discover a narrative that is less about a singular being and more about the human condition itself. He remains relevant not because of power retained, but because of the questions his story refuses to let us ignore. Where does knowledge end and wisdom begin? What price are we willing to pay for self-determination? And who do we become when we forget who we were made to be? Azazel's chains in the wilderness may have silenced his voice, but his echo continues to resound in the stories we tell, the choices we make, and the illusions we chase. His legacy is not a monument. It is a mirror. What once wore the face of celestial rebellion now wears many masks, each one tailored to the culture and appetite of the age. The corruption that began in the days of old has not vanished with the passing of centuries. It has merely refined its disguise. Azazel may be bound in the wilderness, but the principles he instilled, the seeds he scattered, continue to blossom in the fertile soil of modern human desire. The stage has changed, the scenery updated, but the script remains eerily familiar. Consider how easily violence is consumed today, not merely accepted, but celebrated. From digital screens to real-world ideologies, the spirit of destruction has woven itself into the fabric of entertainment and politics. What Azazel once taught as weapon-making, as the glorification of power through force, now thrives in stories where the hero becomes indistinguishable from the tyrant. The sword has become symbolic, but the thirst it satisfies is the same: the desire to dominate, to retaliate, to protect not righteousness, but pride. War is no longer only fought with blades. It is waged with words, with influence, with manipulation, yet all echo the ancient melody of control masked as strength. Materialism has taken root as a quiet, seductive idol, one that requires no temple, only attention. The adornments Azazel once introduced, once reserved for vanity and seduction, have become a lifestyle philosophy. Fashion is not merely about expression. It is often about comparison, about superiority, about invisibility through conformity. People are taught to measure worth by possession, to chase symbols of status as if they were symbols of peace. The same desire that led ancient women to mirror celestial beauty with corrupted intent now whispers through curated images, luxury branding, and the relentless scroll of visual perfection. Modern occultism no longer hides in shadows. It is dressed in language of empowerment, self-discovery, and ancient wisdom. From tarot readings presented as harmless fun to astrological forecasts guiding life decisions, the spiritual realm is being navigated without reverence for its holiness. Azazel's legacy lives in the casual opening of doors that were never meant to be forced open. People who once would have shunned dark rituals now invite them through aesthetics, curiosity, and a hunger for meaning devoid of divine authority. The arts of enchantment and divination, once condemned as gateways to deception, are now sold as tools for personal freedom. Yet perhaps the most insidious manifestation is the redefinition of truth itself. Azazel's first rebellion was against divine structure, against the truth of who God is and who angels are meant to be. In the modern age, truth has become negotiable. Identity, morality, even reality itself is bent to the will of the individual. The ancient lie that knowledge without submission can lead to godhood finds its perfect soil in a culture where every person is told they are their own ultimate authority. This, more than any other corruption, signals the echo of the Watcher's fall. It is not merely sin, it is a reimagining of righteousness based on self. And yet, for all its complexity, the spirit of Azazel today is not undefeatable. Its power thrives on ignorance, on distraction, on the willingness to forget history's spiritual consequences. But those who walk with discernment, who remember that wisdom is not the same as information, begin to see clearly. They begin to recognize the ancient fingerprints on modern idols, to feel the weight of what is being offered and to reject it. Resistance begins not in grand gestures, but in choosing to see, to name, to speak. It begins in a heart that refuses to trade the eternal for the immediate. Spiritual vigilance is not fear, it is clarity. To walk wisely in this age is to acknowledge that the corruption of old has found new language, but not new substance. It is to remain rooted in the knowledge that light still exposes darkness, that truth still outlasts lies, and that what was once defeated can be resisted again. Azazel's voice still murmurs through the culture, not as a roar, but as a whisper in the conscience. Yet for those who listen to the voice of the Spirit, that whisper loses its pull. The call is not to retreat from the world, but to engage it with eyes wide open, with hearts guarded by grace and minds anchored in truth. The modern world is not free from the ancient battle. It is its latest battlefield. But the weapons have changed hands. The seduction once forced upon humanity now wears the name of choice, autonomy, and progress. And in the face of such deception, the response must be not only awareness, but alignment with the eternal, with the holy, with the one who was never deceived. Azazel's shadow stretches across history, but it does not reach into every soul. Each person has the power to turn away from that shadow, not through strength of will alone, but through divine wisdom that discerns the lie behind the shine, the cost behind the convenience, the exile behind the promise. In every generation, there remains a remnant who will not be swayed, who remember what was lost and who walk in the hope of what can still be redeemed. Hope often enters not with fanfare, but like the first light of dawn, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. It does not erase the night, but it reveals the path through it. For all the weight of Azazel's corruption, for all the centuries of wandering through spiritual deserts, the story has always contained a deeper current, one that pulls toward redemption, not ruin. This narrative was never meant to end in exile. It was always moving toward return. Even in the earliest chapters of humanity's fall, there existed a whisper of reversal, a divine response that was neither reactive nor uncertain. From the moment sin entered the world, grace began to chase it down. The judgment of Azazel was real, the consequences undeniable, yet they were not the final word. God's plan did not stop at condemnation. It moved forward with restoration in mind, with a strategy that reached beyond the fall to reclaim what had been corrupted. Where Azazel introduced false knowledge to enslave, Christ came with truth that liberates. Where rebellion taught mankind to exalt self, the Son of God walked in perfect submission, offering not just an example, but a way back into communion with the Creator. His life was not merely the opposite of the fallen ones, it was the answer to their lies. In him, the hunger for power was replaced by servanthood, the pursuit of appearance by the beauty of holiness, the thirst for hidden knowledge by the peace of revealed truth. The cross stands as the ultimate contradiction to Azazel's legacy. On that tree, Christ bore the weight of the sin that had spread like wildfire since the days of the Watchers. He became, in a mystery deeper than ritual, both the offering and the scapegoat. He was not driven into the wilderness to be forgotten. He entered the grave to conquer it. He was not bound by divine judgment. He fulfilled it, absorbing its fury and transforming it into mercy. Where Azazel led a revolt that ruptured the cosmos, Christ initiated a restoration that reassembled it. The resurrection is not just a triumph over death. It is a declaration that the spell has been broken. The influence of Azazel, though present, is no longer final. Every seduction he taught, every false glory he offered, every distortion he introduced has now met its match, not through force, but through a love that outlasts all corruption. The power of the Holy Spirit, poured out upon those who believe, is not a symbol or a sentiment. It is the very presence of God returning to dwell within humanity, not as a distant observer, but as an indwelling guide and purifier. This indwelling is the great reversal in motion. Where once the divine withdrew from the polluted, now it takes up residence to purify. Where once mankind was led into idolatry by external influence, now believers are led into truth by an internal voice. This transformation is not superficial. It does not merely polish the exterior. It rewrites the nature of the heart. The Spirit of God does not cover what is broken. It rebuilds from within. To walk in the Spirit is to walk free from the systems Azazel helped create. It is to reject the world's measurements of worth, to refuse the pursuit of power for its own sake, to recognize that purity is not weakness, but strength under divine authority. It is to see through illusion and stand in truth, not truth defined by culture, but truth rooted in eternity. This kind of purity is not isolation from the world, but participation in its renewal. It is living proof that the fall was not the end of the story. The beauty of this redemptive movement is its reach. No person is too far, no past is too heavy, no mind is too confused. The Spirit does not select the flawless. It transforms the willing. Those who once walked under the influence of deception can become vessels of wisdom. Those who once echoed the rebellion of the Watchers can now reflect the humility of the Savior. This is not spiritual theory. It is living reality. Each moment of surrender, each decision to love, each act of obedience becomes a strike against the ancient corruption. Not with noise, but with clarity. Not with might, but with righteousness. And in this reversal, God is not merely restoring individuals. He is rebuilding a kingdom, a people shaped not by the lies of the fallen, but by the truth of the risen. The reversal continues every time someone chooses light over shadow, every time truth is spoken where silence once ruled, every time forgiveness replaces vengeance. This is how the divine plan answers ancient rebellion, not by erasing the memory, but by writing a new future over it. A future where the fall is remembered only to magnify the height of restoration, where the desert becomes the place of encounter, and where what was lost is returned, not as it was, but as it was always meant to be. In the face of such glory, Azazel's story fades. Not forgotten, but outshone. His work, once so pervasive, begins to lose its grip as the Spirit raises a people who no longer bow to fear, no longer hunger for power, and no longer see themselves as captives. The great reversal is not only promised, it is happening. And every transformed life is its evidence. Throughout the ages, the question of justice has lingered in the background of every spiritual conversation, unspoken but ever present, like a drumbeat beneath the melody of grace. For those who have tasted suffering, who have witnessed injustice without resolution, who have watched corruption flourish while truth seems silenced, there arises a longing not only for healing, but for reckoning. And so the story turns toward the end, not merely as conclusion, but as culmination. In the divine narrative, what began with rebellion does not drift into ambiguity, it arrives at judgment. The fate of Azazel, long sealed in waiting, begins to unfold. Scripture and ancient writings converge in their portrayal of a day when the fullness of divine justice will no longer be delayed. The Book of Enoch speaks of a time when Azazel will be brought out of the wilderness, not for restoration, but for final condemnation. His chains, which held him in silence, will give way to a voice of judgment. The darkness that shielded him from the eyes of the world will be stripped away, exposing every deed, every lie, every legacy of corruption he spread. He will stand not as a ruler, not as a forgotten spirit, but as a prisoner before the throne of ultimate authority. The apocalyptic texts do not suggest a battle of equals. They do not portray a contest between darkness and light with an uncertain outcome. Revelation chapter 20, though it names Satan more directly, speaks of the lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels, a final destination not of torment for its own sake, but of separation complete and irreversible. It is here, in the eternal severing from the presence of God, that Azazel finds his end. Not as a myth absorbed by culture, not as an idea to be debated, but as a being whose story concludes in righteous fire. This moment is not driven by wrath alone, but by holiness fulfilled. The patience of God, long extended across generations, will come to its appointed conclusion. For a time, Azazel was allowed to sow confusion, to whisper in the ears of the ambitious and the proud, to walk unseen through the corridors of history. But that allowance was never permission, and that freedom was always temporary. The day of judgment is not a reaction, it is the day the Creator has always intended. The day when truth is no longer resisted and light no longer hidden. In this eschatological vision, the righteousness of God is not cold or mechanical, it is radiant. It reveals that evil, for all its strength and persistence, has no endurance against eternity. Azazel, who once corrupted with impunity, will find himself silenced by the same word he defied. The being who led others into rebellion will face his judge alone, stripped of illusion, devoid of defense. His legacy, once clothed in allure, will be seen for what it truly is: desolation wrapped in brilliance, ruin disguised as revelation. But the fate of Azazel is not merely about punishment, it is a declaration. It proclaims that justice is not an illusion, that every act of evil has been recorded, that no corruption will remain unresolved. For those who have suffered under the weight of darkness, this final act is not vengeful satisfaction, but divine vindication. It affirms that the God who sees all will right every wrong, and that the cries of the righteous have never fallen into silence. The judgment of Azazel also serves as a final severing between creation and corruption. With his condemnation, the influence he once wielded is extinguished. No longer will the earth bear the echoes of his voice. No longer will the systems he inspired continue to confuse the generations. What he began ends here, not with another cycle of decay, but with finality. His presence, once a symbol of rebellion's seductive power, becomes a reminder that all rebellion has an end. And yet, this conclusion is not marked by sorrow for the faithful, it is crowned with hope. The fall of Azazel is not the end of the story. It is the clearing of the stage for what comes next. Divine justice makes way for divine restoration. With every rival silenced, the kingdom of God stands unopposed, unshaken, and unending. What was once tainted is now sanctified. What was distorted is made clear. The world no longer divided between light and shadow begins to radiate with unbroken peace. Azazel's name, once spoken with fear or fascination, becomes a name forgotten, not because it is erased from memory, but because it holds no power in the new world to come. His fate reminds every soul that no force, no spirit, no being, no matter how ancient or influential, can stand against the holiness of the one who was, and is to come. The victory is not merely spiritual, it is cosmic. And in that victory, The weight of all that Azazel unleashed is lifted once and for all. Hope does not simply return at the end of history, it becomes history's new beginning. As the dust of judgment settles and the voices of rebellion fall silent, a new clarity dawns over creation. The memory of Azazel and all he introduced no longer holds sway, not because it has been ignored, but because it has been overcome. The chains of deception are broken, and the ground once cursed by corruption is made holy again. What follows is not the repair of a broken system, but the unveiling of something entirely new. This new beginning for mankind is not just a theological concept, it is a spiritual reality born from divine intention. What humanity lost in Eden is restored in fullness, not merely as a return to innocence, but as a progression into glory. The scars of the past do not vanish, but they no longer bleed. They remain as testimonies of what was, and of what grace has made new. The journey that began with defilement ends in renewal, not because of man's strength, but because of divine mercy. No longer are people shaped by the influence of the Watchers or guided by the hidden hand of Azazel. Instead, they are transformed by the indwelling presence of the Spirit, walking in alignment with the heart of the Creator. The knowledge that once led astray is replaced by wisdom born of communion. Vanity gives way to purpose. Sorcery is silenced by intimacy with the divine. The world is no longer driven by fear, comparison, and ambition, but by love, truth, and peace. This new humanity walks with clarity, no longer questioning its identity, no longer striving for significance apart from the source. Relationships, once twisted by lust and manipulation, become rooted in honor and selflessness. Power, once idolized, becomes irrelevant. The pursuit of control fades as trust in divine order deepens. This reversal is not symbolic, it is tangible, experienced in every breath of the redeemed, in every decision made from a place of holy conviction. And so, what becomes of mankind is not just survival, but restoration into its true image, bearers of divine light, guardians of sacred trust, children no longer estranged. The victory over Azazel is not a single event, but a living testimony, carried in every soul that chose truth over deception, humility over pride, and love over the lie. The story ends where it was always meant to begin, in union with the Creator, in the peace that passes understanding, in the glory that no darkness can diminish. If this message has stirred something within you, we invite you to become part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel to receive more spiritual insights and teachings like this one. Like the video to help us reach others who may need this truth. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or testimony. We read everyone. And most importantly, share this video with someone close to you. You never know whose life might be touched by a word of light. Thank you for watching. May you walk in clarity, in strength, and in the fullness of what was always meant for you.